No one sees the buffalo before something goes wrong. They only notice what follows: the silence, the broken fence, the missing man, the feeling that the land has turned its back on them. Out on the high plains, where the grass bends endlessly beneath the sky, there are places locals avoid without ever agreeing to do so. The roads still pass nearby, the wind still moves through the tall grass, but people don't stop. They don't camp. They don't linger once the sun begins to fall. Because something still walks there. Not loudly, not often, and not for everyone. The story didn't begin with a ghost. It began with a job, seasonal, low-paying, and far from town. A wildlife monitoring post set up near a protected stretch of land once used as a buffalo migration corridor. Officially, the assignment was simple: track movement, document erosion, report signs of illegal hunting. Unofficially, it was a place people transferred out of as soon as they could. The first night, the new ranger noticed the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but a hollow one, the sort that settles after something has left and never returned. The insects went still before midnight. Birds avoided the western ridge entirely. Even the wind seemed to hesitate when passing through certain patches of grass. At 2:13 a.m., the motion sensor triggered. The camera caught nothing but fog drifting low across the ground. No animals, no people, just a wide, dark shape briefly blocking the stars before dissolving back into the night. The file was marked as interference, weather anomaly, nothing worth logging. But the ranger couldn't shake the feeling that something had paused to look back. The following morning, hoofprints appeared where no animals had walked for over a century. Not cattle, not deer, too wide, too deep, too deliberate. They led toward the old boundary markers, stones placed long ago, back when the land had names that were never written down. The ranger followed them only a short distance before the ground changed. Grass flattened in a wide arc, as if something massive had stood there for a long time, watching. Locals had a name for the presence, though few would say it aloud. They called it the Guardian. Not a spirit meant to protect people, but one meant to remember. A witness bound to the land after the buffalo were slaughtered, their bones left to bleach beneath the same sun that now warmed empty plains. A remnant of something tasked with standing watch long after the last herd fell. Those who respected the land never saw it. Those who didn't sometimes did. And those people rarely stayed. By the end of the week, the ranger had stopped sleeping through the night. Dreams came instead, of thunder without clouds, of the ground trembling beneath unseen weight, of eyes level with the horizon, unblinking and patient. On the seventh night, the fence at the western boundary collapsed. No storm, no animals caught on camera, just posts driven into the earth at an angle, as if something had leaned against them calmly and waited. That was when the ranger understood. The buffalo were gone, but the one who guarded them never left. The ranger reported the fence damage at first light, careful to keep the language neutral. No mention of weight without tracks, no mention of prints that shouldn't exist. Just wood displaced, soil compacted, no clear cause. The response was delayed. By noon, an older supervisor arrived, the kind of man who had worked the plains long enough to stop asking certain questions. He walked the boundary without speaking, paused where the grass lay flattened, and knelt beside the disturbed earth. His hand lingered there longer than necessary. "This isn't new," he said finally. "It just doesn't happen often." They didn't file an incident report. Instead, the supervisor shared something unofficial. something that never made it into training manuals or public briefings. The land had a memory. Before conservation zones, before property lines, before maps, this stretch of plains was a corridor. Tens of thousands of buffalo passed through it season after season, their movement shaping the soil, the grass, the water. When the herds were destroyed, the lands didn't recover the way planners expected. Something remained unfinished. In the late 1800s, when the last large herds were driven away or killed, a man was hired to guard what remained. Not officially, not by the government, by people who knew the loss couldn't be stopped, only witnessed. His job was to watch over the final migration path and ensure no further slaughter took place. He stayed long after there was nothing left to guard. Locals said he stopped aging, said his footprints grew heavier each year, said the plains began reacting to him, grass bending when he passed, animals diverting around the land he occupied. When he died, they buried him there. The ground refused to settle. From then on, disruptions began. Fences failing without storms, wagons breaking axles on perfectly flat ground, horses refusing to cross invisible lines, men disappearing after nights spent hunting where they shouldn't. Always without struggle, always without noise. The ranger listened, unsettled by how casually the story was told. There was no fear in the supervisor's voice, only acceptance. The guardian doesn't stop people, it measures them. That night, the cameras went dark at exactly the same time, 1:47 a.m. No power surge, no malfunction, just silence across the entire system. When the feed returned, one camera showed a shape on the western ridge. Massive, still, outlined faintly against the stars. It didn't move like an animal. It stood like a landmark. The ranger watched the footage again and again, noting the way the grass bowed outward, the way the horizon seemed to lower beneath its presence. There were no glowing eyes, no spectral haze, just absence, as if the plains themselves had stepped aside. The next morning, a nearby rancher was reported missing. His truck was found idling by a gate he had crossed hundreds of times before. The gate stood open. The grass beyond it was pressed flat in a wide, deliberate path leading toward the protected land. Searchers followed the trail until the ground hardened unnaturally. The soil felt compacted, dense, unyielding, as though something had stood there for a very long time, waiting. They never found the rancher. No blood, no signs of struggle, just a single boot heel pressed deep into the earth, angled backward, as if he had stopped and decided not to run. The ranger stood at the edge of the search zone, watching the grass sway in the distance. For the first time, he understood. The guardian didn't haunt the land. It belonged to it. And anyone who treated the plains as empty, as something taken rather than shared, was already trespassing. By the time the investigation was quietly suspended, no one involved pretended the rancher had wandered off on his own. Men who had worked these plains for decades knew the difference between someone getting lost and someone being taken out of place. This was the latter. The ranger was advised, not ordered, to stop reviewing the footage from the Western cameras. The files were archived, labeled inconclusive, and buried beneath routine environmental data. But warnings like that only work on people who believe everything has an explanation. The ranger did not. He began to notice patterns that couldn't be unseen once recognized. Certain stretches of land were avoided by wildlife year-round, not just seasonally. Water pooled differently there, lingering longer after rainfall, reflecting the sky with unnatural clarity. Grass grew thicker, darker, heavier, bending low even in calm weather. The land was burdened. Locals never crossed those areas directly. They circled them, added miles to their routes, left gates unlocked as offerings of courtesy. They didn't speak of superstition, but their habits revealed respect shaped by generations of loss. One evening, an elderly ranch hand stopped by the monitoring post unannounced. He leaned against the fence, chewing nothing, eyes fixed on the western horizon. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked without turning. The ranger didn't answer. The man nodded anyway. "Doesn't matter. Once is enough." He explained the rules as if reciting weather patterns, not laws, not beliefs, observations. You don't camp where the grass folds inward. You don't take more than you need. You don't follow tracks that don't match any living animal. And if the ground feels heavier than it should, you leave. Most important of all, you never try to document the guardian directly. "It doesn't like being counted," said the man. "That's how the trouble starts." The ranger pretended to listen politely, but the cameras were already rolling that night. At 2:02 a.m., the plains changed. Not suddenly, gradually. The stars above the western ridge dimmed, not from clouds, but from something rising between earth and sky. The grass flattened in expanding circles. Wind patterns bent outward as though diverted around a massive obstruction. Then this shape appeared. It was not translucent, not glowing, not dramatic. It was solid. The outline resembled a buffalo only in scale and posture, head lowered slightly, shoulders high, bulk immense. But its surface was wrong. Not fur, not hide. It looked like compacted shadow and soil, textured like packed earth after heavy rain. The ground beneath it compressed further, sinking slightly, as if acknowledging weight far greater than what was visible. The guardian did not walk. It shifted position without lifting its mass, the way a continent might move over centuries. Each adjustment altered the land subtly, redistributing pressure, changing balance. The cameras did not glitch. They recorded everything. And that was the mistake. At dawn, one camera pole lay snapped at its base, driven into the ground at an impossible angle. No footprints surrounded it, no marks indicating force from the side, only compression, downward, deliberate, final. The ranger felt sick. By noon, 2 more cameras had failed, not broken, buried, their mounts driven into the soil, lenses filled with dirt so densely packed it resembled stone. Whatever had done it understood weight, pressure, consequence. The supervisor returned that afternoon, his face set in quiet frustration. "You didn't listen," he said. The ranger tried to explain, evidence, proof, the need to understand. "You can't study a boundary," the man replied. "You can only respect it." That night, the guardian came closer. The ranger sensed it before seeing it, a deep vibration beneath the soles of his boots, subtle but constant. The air felt thicker. Breathing required more effort. Even sound seemed muffled, swallowed before traveling far. Outside, the plains stretched wide and open, but the space felt occupied. Then the smell arrived. Not decay, not rot. Dust, old grass, sun-baked bone. The ranger stepped onto the porch despite every instinct screaming against it. The moon hung low, pale and distant. In the far field, something darker interrupted the horizon line, closer than before. The guardian stood facing the station now. It did not move, did not threaten, did not acknowledge. It simply was. And the land leaned towards it. The ranger understood then that the guardian was not watching people. It was watching balance. Every fence driven too deep, every animal taken without purpose, every attempt to claim land without understanding it. The guardian had no need to act often. It waited. Pressure accumulated, mistakes layered atop mistakes, until the land itself required correction. The rancher had crossed that threshold. So had others before him. The ranger backed away slowly, careful not to shift weight abruptly. He closed the door without sound, turned off the lights, and sat in darkness until morning. By dawn, the plains were empty again. No tracks, no flattened grass, no evidence. But something had changed. A new boundary existed. From that day forward, equipment malfunctioned whenever it approached the western corridor. Vehicles stalled, GPS units drifted wildly, maps refused to align with reality. The land resisted categorization, measurement, ownership. The ranger submitted a transfer request within the week. Before leaving, he buried the remaining footage. Not out of fear, out of understanding. The Guardian did not need witnesses. It needed restraint. And as long as the plains remembered what had been lost, the Guardian would remain. The violation did not begin with violence. It began with paperwork. A development proposal surfaced quietly, buried beneath environmental assessments and economic forecasts. Wind energy expansion, access roads, survey markers placed across several miles of underutilized plains. Official language stripped the land of history, reducing it to coordinates and potential output. The Western Corridor was included. Those who reviewed the proposal noticed the omission immediately. No mention of prior incidents, no acknowledgement of missing persons, no reference to equipment failures or unexplained anomalies. The land had been rendered blank. The ranger, now stationed hundreds of miles away, learned of it by accident. An email forwarded too late, a map attachment that made his stomach tighten the moment he saw the boundary lines. They crossed straight through it. He called his former supervisor. The line remained silent longer than it should have. "They won't listen," the man said finally. "They never do when money gets involved." Survey teams arrived within the month. Trucks rolled across grass that had not been compressed in decades. Metal stakes were driven deep into soil that resisted, then yielded with unsettling ease. The ground responded not with collapse, but with density, compacting unnaturally as if bracing itself. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, a surveyor dreamed of hooves pounding beneath the earth, though the ground outside his tent lay still and flat. He woke with his heart racing, unable to explain the weight pressing against his chest. By the third night, one of the trucks wouldn't start. The engine turned, the battery was full. The vehicle simply refused to move, as though held in place by something heavier than friction. They joked about cursed land. They kept working. On the fourth day, the stakes began to vanish. Not pulled out, not disturbed, gone. Surveyors returned to find empty holes where metal rods had been driven. The soil around them showed no signs of digging, no looseness, no disruption. The ground had closed itself neatly, swallowing the markers without trace. New stakes were placed. They disappeared too. At dusk, a man noticed something strange about the grass patterns near the western ridge. Flattened arcs radiated outward, subtle but deliberate, as if something had stood there long enough to leave an impression without movement. He did not report it. He did not return to camp that night either. His radio was found the next morning, resting upright in the grass, powered on, transmitting static. His footprints led away from camp in a straight line, no hesitation, no deviation, until they simply ended. The ground beneath the last print felt unnaturally firm, compressed to a density no human weight could produce. Work was paused briefly. Authorities attributed the disappearance to exposure, disorientation, wildlife, the usual explanations offered when certainty threatens progress. A replacement team arrived within days. That night, the Guardian appeared again, this time closer than ever before. Multiple workers saw it from different angles, each describing the same impossible stillness, a massive shape against the starlit plains, darker than shadow, heavier than darkness should be. The ground bowed beneath it, not cracking, not collapsing, submitting. No one approached, no one spoke. those who tried to look directly at it felt an overwhelming pressure behind their eyes, as though the act of observation itself was unwelcome. Cameras failed instantly. Drones lost signal and descended straight down, embedding themselves into soil that hardened on impact. The Guardian did not advance. It did not need to. The land around it changed instead. Wind patterns shifted, grass flattened inward. The plains no longer behaved like open terrain, but like a contained space, boundaries drawn by weight and memory rather than fences. By morning, 2 access roads had warped beyond use. The soil beneath them compacted unevenly, buckling asphalt without cracking it. Equipment sank only inches, just enough to immobilize, not enough to destroy. The message was not subtle. This land would not be crossed. Executives flew in to observe the delays firsthand. They stood on safe ground and discussed logistics, costs, timelines. None of them stepped into the Western Corridor. None of them needed to. They could feel it from where they stood. The plains felt occupied. A decision was made to reroute the project. Officially, it was due to unexpected geological resistance. Unofficially, no one wanted to test how much resistance the land still held. The last survey team packed up in silence. No celebration, no relief, just the quiet acknowledgement that something older had prevailed. As the trucks left, one worker glanced back. For a brief moment, the grass parted against the horizon, and the Guardian stood there, unmoving, immense, patient, watching them go. After the project was rerouted, the plains returned to something resembling normalcy. Roads reopened, equipment failures ceased. The wind resumed its familiar patterns, brushing through the tall grass as if nothing had happened. But those who had been there knew better. The land had not forgiven. It had simply been satisfied. The former ranger returned one final time months later, long after the survey crews were gone and the paperwork closed. Officially, he was on leave. Unofficially, he needed to see the place again. Not to document it, not to measure it, but to understand what had been preserved. He parked miles away and walked the rest of the distance, careful to follow the old routes locals still used without admitting why. The plains stretched wide and open beneath a pale sky, deceptively empty. No fences marked the Western Corridor anymore. No signs warned against trespass. None were needed. As he crossed into the area, the air changed subtly. Sound dulled. The wind slowed, as if negotiating passage. His steps felt heavier, not because the ground was soft, but because it resisted being used without intention. He stopped at the place where the grass grew darkest. This was where the Guardian had stood most often. There were no tracks, no depressions, nothing a camera could capture, and yet the land carried a presence, not threatening, not watchful, but attentive. As though the plains themselves were listening for something they had not heard in a very long time. Thunder rolled in the distance. The ranger closed his eyes, and for a moment the present thinned. He imagined the herds as they once were, not ghosts, not spirits, but living mass. Tens of thousands of bodies moving as one, hooves drumming the earth into purpose. The plains were never empty then. They were alive with weight, shaped by motion, sustained by balance. When that balance was destroyed, something had been left behind. Not to punish, to remember. The Guardian was not the spirit of a buffalo, nor the ghost of a man, nor a creature born of grief. It was an imprint, a consequence given form by land that had been altered too violently, too quickly to forget. The Guardian existed because the plains had once carried more than they were allowed to keep, and it would not allow that mistake to happen again. As the ranger stood there, the ground vibrated faintly. Not a warning, not a threat, an acknowledgement. He lowered his head. "I understand," he said quietly, though no one had asked him to speak. The wind passed through the grass in a long, slow wave. Somewhere beyond the horizon, thunder faded without rain. That night, far from the plains, a rancher dreamed of buffalo moving beneath the stars, their shapes vast and unbroken. He woke with tears on his face and no memory of why. The next morning, he altered his fence line, leaving a wide stretch of land untouched, unsure why the decision felt necessary, only that it did. Similar choices echoed outward. A hunter turned back before crossing an invisible line. A developer abandoned a proposal after repeated delays. A road plan shifted just enough to spare a quiet stretch of grass. None of them spoke of guardians. They didn't need to. The guardian did not appear again in any recorded form. No footage, no sightings, no stories dramatic enough to spread. And that, perhaps, was its greatest success. Because the guardian was never meant to be seen. It was meant to be felt, in hesitation, in restraint, in the instinct to leave something alone even when no rule demands it. The plains still look empty to those passing through. Tourists see only grass and sky. Maps show nothing unusual. History books dedicate a few brief paragraphs to the slaughter, then move on. But the land remembers. And where memory persists, balance can be restored, not through force, but through quiet refusal. If you ever find yourself standing on open plains that feel too still, where the wind slows and the ground seems to weigh your presence, listen carefully. That feeling is not fear. It is permission being reconsidered. Step lightly. Take nothing you cannot justify. And if the land feels full when it should be empty, leave. Because the buffalo may be gone, but the one who guarded them never was.